Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Shwaib, and I'll be walking you through a series on God, Islam, and science. In today's session, I want to start off with a very simple conversation on what the state of affairs are today. I realize that a lot of you are fasting. Some of you may have exceptions for whatever reason, but don't think this is going to be an overly complicated series. I don't want to get you out there in terms of heavy philosophy. We're going to have a nice, relaxing conversation about the state of affairs related to Islamic beliefs and how atheists are challenging those beliefs in light of science. This is an area that I've been working in precisely because I feel that this needs attention and it deserves constructive attempts from our side to look at this very meaningfully. Because I have witnessed myself people getting doubts over this issue, people even leaving Islam over this issue. So I think it is something that is of great concern and it's something that we should be paying attention to. So let's start off with a very basic historical overview. Where did this term atheism rise and how did it evolve over time? Atheism has meant a few different things depending on when you're looking at human civilization. It has meant, in some parts of our history, referring to anyone who goes against orthodoxy, for example. Right? It has also been used to refer to individuals who believe that God created the universe and then he just left the universe to its own devices. So that means he's not involved in the day-to-day affairs. It's also been used at times to refer to agnostics. These are individuals who don't have a strong swing either way, believing in God's existence or denying God's existence, just on the fence. In more immediate history, it has primarily been aimed at Christian theology, so people who denied the Christian conception of God. And in very recent terms, it's become more of a universal descriptor, referring to belief that denies all gods in toto, Islam included. Now, it is of no surprise, and I'm sure that many of you are probably familiar with this, that our immediate form of atheism is New Atheism. And there are four faces that really kicked it off. These four are Sam Harris. In 2004, he published this book called The End of Faith. In 2006, we had Daniel Dennett. He had a book called Breaking the Spell. In 2006, we also had Richard Dawkins' God Delusion. And in 2007, we had Christopher Hitchens, who published God is Not Great. And for those of you who picked that up, this is the antithesis of the very first statement in the Adhan, Allahu Akbar. Now, these four individuals collectively crystallized into the New Atheism movement. Now, you may be questioning, Shwaib, atheism is not a new idea. It's been there for centuries. What gave them so much traction? Well, one explanation is that they shot to fame primarily because it was in a post-9/11 era where Islamophobia was on the rise, and this just accelerated these ideas and clustered into a very, very anti-religious movement. Now, my intention today is to show that there's a further qualification that makes New Atheism distinctive to other forms of atheism. But we'll get to that in a second. So these are the big four guns: Harris, Dennett, Dawkins, and Hitchens. There have been other waves that have come into fruition because of these four. These are lesser known, but good to point out nonetheless. Some of these include Lawrence Krauss. He published a book called The Universe from Nothing. So he uses physics to show that we don't really need God. We have science to explain the world. Michael Shermer, he is the chief editor of the Skeptic magazine. You have Victor Stenger, a physicist. He wrote several books articulating the idea that science proves that there is no God. We don't really need him. And A.C. Grayling, a philosopher in the British context. Now, the buck doesn't just stop there. New Atheism has had a significant impact in the Muslim world. And because of that impact, we are now seeing increasing levels of ex-Muslim atheism. So in my analysis, when I was looking into how atheism has encroached upon Muslim societies, it is alarming to see that there have been an increasing number of books written by people who once were Muslims who have now left the faith. This is just a handful of of books. Why I'm Not a Muslim by Ibn Warraq. Ayan Hirsi Ali, who I'm sure most of you might be familiar with, she published this book called Infidel in 2007. Tanner Edis, who is a physicist, he has a book called An Illusion of Harmony. In 2014, Armin Navabi wrote a very thin book called Why There Is No God. Simple responses to 20 common arguments for the existence of God. In 2016, we had Ali Rizvi, The Atheist Muslim, a journey from religion to reason. And more recently, particularly for those of you who listen to Urdu podcasts, The Curse of God by Haris Sultan. Now, these individuals haven't just published books, they're also very visible and active on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And they have a heavy presence online. And it is of no surprise that we are seeing Muslims gaining doubts because of this, Muslims having questions because of this, and also getting confused in the thick of it. And it is for this reason why I thought it'd be very, very suitable to have a series, at least having this conversation in this beautiful, blessed month of Ramadan. Now, I said earlier that I think there are further qualifications that we can make about new atheism. New atheism is not just new because it's post 9/11. New atheism has something extra to it. And to prove this, or justify this, I will be looking at quotes from 4 different non-Muslim scholars who have made this very observation. And I think cumulatively, you'll come to agree with me that this is indeed the case. So let's look at the first quote that we have here. This is by Dr. Ian Markham. This is what he says. Harris is the worst. He makes Islamophobia a central part of his message. Hitchens comes second. To his credit, perhaps, he recognizes that the bad aspects of Islam are also found in Christianity and Judaism. In fact, for Hitchens, there are no good religious traditions. And for Dawkins, Islam is an illustration of the strange and bizarre behavior of religious people. It is interesting to note how both Harris and Hitchens supported the American war to Iraq primarily as a result of their deep prejudice against Islam. Very interesting. Our second scholar, Dr. Tina Beatty, who is a feminist, this is what she says. Today, the new atheists are as hostile towards theologians as the most militant Victorian scientists were. But in the 19th century, the religious other was made up of all those barbarians. So she's referring to that imperial expansion that really defined the Victorian era. The religious other was made of all those barbarians and savages who littered the imperial globe with their presence. Today, and here's where it gets interesting, it is Islam which constitutes the religious other, and it is still represented as a barbaric force to be conquered and civilized by the imperial powers of reason and progress. For those of you who are well read on your history, I'm sure a certain book is coming in your mind. Here's another quote by a third scholar, Dr. William Emilson. This is what he says. In my view, the newness of the new atheism movement has very little to do with its in-your-face, aggressive nature, or its popularity, or even its scientific approach to religion. What seems to distinguish it from earlier forms of atheism is the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle ways, it critiques and attacks Islam through its scattergun critique of religion in general. For the new atheists, their general condemnation of religion targets not only Islamic extremism, but also Islam, because in the main, they admit no meaningful distinction between moderate and extremist Islam. Islam in the new atheist writings is consistently depicted as irrational, immoral, and in its purest forms, violent. We have a fourth quote here by Stephen LeDrew. Now this individual is very interesting because he published a monograph called The Evolution of Atheism, The Politics of a Modern Movement. This is published with Oxford University Press. And I'll be drawing in from this book quite a lot because I think he has some interesting things to say. Look what he says about new atheism in relation to Islam. For new atheism, Islam represents both types of threats, pre-modern and post-modern. As a religion founded on faith, It is a pre-modern threat to scientific modernity, and it illustrates the progressive evolution of human societies, with Islamic societies representing barbarism and the West representing civilization. But it also represents the postmodern threat in that the new atheists believe that epistemic relativism and cultural pluralism have paradoxically rendered the West incapable of effectively dealing with the threat posed by radical Islam. And here's the kicker. This is what he says. Islam indeed is the most important element in the new atheist construction of an ideal of Western civilization. So if you stitch those four quotes together, the fundamental narrative of the new atheist movement becomes very clear. It is inherently, I think, a reflection of the clash of civilizations narrative, where the West is on the one side and Islam is on the other. And this is a significant problem from the new atheist perspective, because these folks that follow Islam are very irrational, they believe in a lot of barbaric things, and they need to be dealt with. So you can see here, this is not just a micro conversation about faith, but it's also a macro conversation in terms of how these ideas are playing out in society. Now, Stephen LeDrew doesn't just stop there. He has some interesting things that link atheism and Islam in relationship to science. This is what he says. Modernity for new atheists is coterminous with secularization, which in their view is essentially the progressive universalization of scientism. Now I'll stop there for a second, because I know that word may be new for some of you. Science is a method or a bunch of methods that we use to understand the world around us, right? So we use science to create, medicine that can help us. We use science to construct bridges. We use science to understand the world around us, right? Astronomy, chemistry, periodic table, biology, and all of that. Fair enough. But scientism is slightly different. Scientism is a worldview which relies on the belief that the only way to understand the world is through science. And this is a philosophy that is different to the methodology that is science. And hopefully, inshallah, we will unpack this difference a bit more in the second session. Let's get back to the quote. That is, the authority of science within political institutions, but more importantly, the adoption of a scientific worldview by individuals to such an extent that is culturally dominant. In other words, what Stephen LeDrew is saying is that new atheism wants to provide support and oxygen to an environment where scientism is on the rise. Science becomes the basis for absolutely everything. And as we'll come to see, inshallah, in the duration of this series, that this is challengeable from our side. He goes on to continue to make three important claims that I think are very relevant for us. New atheists adopt three central strategies. Number one, to discredit claims by religious texts, institutions, and leaders. Number two, to persuade others to adopt a worldview of scientism. And number three, to build a sense of community and a positive identity for atheists in order to encourage others to come out. Now, let's take a step back from all of this. We live in a world where social media has been on the rise. YouTube kicked off in 2010. Now we have access to all kinds of information that can be delivered by everyone and accessible to everyone. And therefore, it is of no surprise that we do see certain ideas that challenge traditional beliefs, right? One of these ideas is, one, that atheism is a very prominent position and it has respectful backing. And science is actually the utility of atheists, not religious folks. And this is where this connection between science and atheism becomes very strongly linked. Science is used to show that God doesn't exist. Science is used to show that religious texts are discredited because they talk about things like miracles. How do you explain that? And science is used to show that we don't need God anymore. We don't need religion anymore. We have everything we need to be able to understand the world around us. Now, the question is this really the case? Is this genuinely the case? And I would argue no. And this is where we come in the space of usul ad-din, Islamic theology. One of the many beautiful sciences that we have in the Islamic tradition is known as usul ad-din, or ilm al-kalam if you want to call it. And this is the space where we articulate our belief systems. And believe it or not, it actually starts off with, many of these texts do, on how to prove the existence of Allah. How do you understand the nature of creation? How do you understand the nature of the relationship between Allah and creation? How do you understand miracles? All of these questions that are pertinent to modern day discussions. And it is my intention, inshallah, to walk you through some of these conversations in a very meaningful, accessible manner. Like I said, I know many of you are fasting, so I'm going to take it very light and easy. But I hope that you'll be able to follow me through these conversations in the next 3 lessons. And I hope, inshallah, by the end of it, you'll be able to see that you can come out as a very confident Muslim that can engage with these discussions head on. Now, before we wrap up today, I do have some reading material for you in case any of you are interested in reading up further on this discussion about Islam, science, and atheism. There are 2 books in particular that I found very beneficial in my research. The first one is called The Apostates by Simon Cotty. And this is a book that analyzes ex-Muslim atheists in the West, primarily UK, US, Canada, and Australia. And the other one is Arabs Without God by Brian Whitaker. It does the exact same thing, but looks at ex-Muslim atheism in the Middle East. Now, what's very interesting is that both of these cover a lot of the same reasons for why Muslims are leaving, right, Islam. And one of them includes science. One of them also includes Richard Dawkins. So that's very interesting, particularly for parents and teachers and for leaders, imams in particular, if you want to know about how these ideas are playing about in society. But also very interesting is how their idiosyncratic differences sociopolitically also influences what kind of conversations are taking place in these 2 different areas. It's also very helpful because it also talks about, both of these talk about the emotional reasons why some people leave Islam. Some people leave Islam because of hypocrisy that they see, right, in their family members or what have you. Sometimes it's to do with misinformation of texts. So I would strongly suggest that this is something you look into, you access these, and they are very, very beneficial for furthering your knowledge about this kind of space. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As an independent institution of higher education and a registered body, Cambridge Muslim College relies on its friends, patrons, and supporters from across the UK and beyond. Help Cambridge Muslim College train the next generations of future thinkers, scholars, and leaders, and continue delivering education series like our Ramadan programming. You can support our vital work by becoming a friend or patron, or by giving a one-off donation, whatever the amount, or you can also pay your zakat to the college, directly benefiting students in need. Visit cambridgemuslimcollege.ac.uk/donate and donate today. Thank you.